In the 22nd chapter or 23rd? Which one is that?
22nd. Finished the 21st.
Oh, 22nd. Now, you see, the subject matter of from 22nd to 27th, now practically, is a discussion of the possible form of world union and necessity of unification of the world under an administrative world state. What would be the function of that world state? He is only trying to see various possibilities. The problem is like this, that many public workers and politicians are faced with this problem of what form that unity, world unity, if it is going to happen, is going to take. This is a difficult situation because they have no precedent. They have no precedent to decide what would be the form. They have no idea of what has happened before. He is therefore pointing out here that you try to see the evolution of the nation unit and the evolution of the nation into state. The nation is a consciousness, people, and that has come into being. Now that has, for its administrative purpose, created a state. What passages did it pass through? Very similar would be the passages through which the world union will have to pass if it is to create a world state. And the question he puts more pertinently is whether the world state is at all necessary or a union. Not an organized state, but a world union. You understand? There is a distinction. He is trying to discuss these possibilities. And if the world state will have to be, what will be its nature and what it will be compelled to do? He says there will be then military centralization, administrative centralization, control of economic life of the race, control of the cultural life of the people, of whole human race. This will have to be in the world state. Do you understand?
The world state, not world
Yes, yes. In the world state, these will be compulsorily like a state. It will have to organize itself on a centralized military, power, centralized economic control, centralized administrative and judiciary system. This will have to become in some form or other. It may be 1 century, 2 centuries after. It is not, it will come tomorrow. It is not going to come tomorrow. But he is trying to work out the possibilities. And that is a great guide to the modern statesmen and politicians if they want to take and if they want to open their eyes. Well, if they don't want, it is their business. But if they want, it is open to them to see that the same process of evolution of the nation state will have to be followed in the organization of the world state. Whether it is desirable, that is a more important point to decide. But if they want to know the form, well, he says, you will have to organize and move along certain lines. If you want a world union, you will have to move along other lines. Well, now we are here. He is now in this chapter 22nd trying to take up world union or world state. That is the two alternatives he is putting first and working out one. Up to 27th chapter, you see, he is working out the possibilities of world state. And then he is taking up how far world union would be also desirable. Now here he is saying, the development of central authority and therefore uniformity of administration, legislation, social and economic life and even of cultural life will have to follow in a world state. Transformation of the governing authority from small body to a body whose function is to represent the thought and will of the whole community. That principle will have to be applied to world state, just as here. Everybody cannot go and decide on a measure in parliament in a nation, so no nation will be allowed to go and bother its head about the world state. Somebody will be representing the whole, and they will have to decide. So a small body will have to be created whose function it is to represent the thought and will of the whole community, mankind. Just as parliament represents the nation and the peoples, so there will be a representative small body will represent the thought and will of the whole race. That is to say, natural and organic, group will have to, give place to rational and mechanically organized state. A rational, ordered and strict uniformity replaces a loose oneness full of natural complexities and variations. That is what happens. And then, now what takes place as custom or mass of custom and institutions will have to replace by an organized will. An organized will take the form of law and regulation, not custom and institutions. World state to replace natural organic unity of mankind, because unity is already there. The unity of mankind is not in question, it is existing there. What form it is going to take, whether world union or world state. So he says the unity is already there. Involuntary association, yes, of peoples, interdependence of peoples is there, then mutual influence is there, already working in mankind, which shows that mankind is already one in that sense. And isolation is practically impossible now. Common, vital and common mutual existence has been accepted by all people practically, that this is, you have to maintain a common life, common, at least commercial and interdependent life and mutual existence. And a shock was necessary to give the whole community of nations the conscious will to say that we want to become one. And that shock was supplied by 2 world wars. World war is already won, and shock was needed. And the Great World War gave that shock. Well, so the transition between this shock that gives the need to realize the world unity and the actual realization of whatever is waiting for man, whether a state or a world union, well, this is we are passing to a period of transition and therefore to a period of crisis. Period of transition, a period of crisis. If you get a world state, there will be centralization, uniformity, mechanical unity. If there is world union, well, we will have liberty, variation, and a free, intelligent unity. These are alternatives between which mankind will have to choose or nations will have to choose. That is chapter 22nd. The substance of chapter 22nd I am giving you. It's a long chapter. Then in the 23rd chapter he discusses the forms of government, because that is a form of government that is trying to come into being, the world state. Loose union of free nations and empires, slowly well knit. That seems to be the present practical and ideal form at present. A loose union of free nations and also even of some empires. Slowly well knit, slowly coming together. That seems to be a practicable idea, a form that it can take. But generally in the mind of man, the state idea is dominant. He doesn't want to leave it like that to the variation of life. He wants to pin it down to some definite form so that he can be. This is the law of reason. Mind is not law of life. Life wants to be free and fluent and elastic, while mind wants to be rigid, and clear and definite and mechanical, almost trying to reduce everything to mechanical order. So the state idea is dominant. So you begin with a loose union and end in a state. This is what has happened in the nation unit also. You see, begin with a loose union of groups or people and you end into a state. Well, now state represent the united will of the nations. Such a world state will have to represent the united will of the nations. And then it will tend to increasing uniformity. Increasing uniformity. Even it may try to realize one language if it can realize such an impossibility at present. And if such a governing body is come to the top or is going to be organized, what would be the character and composition of that governing body called the world state or world union? You see, what is the character? Will it be monarchy? So that is ruled out practically. it will remain like a symbol as in England without any power and so on, symbol of them without any power. And in no continental country monarchy has survived. And when the last monarch is gone, it will be not that life has gone, but survival of monarchy has gone. Because even monarchy where it is only a survival and not something living. Now, you call the republican form. But if you go to Asian countries, the republican form is not very natural to the Asian mentality, group mentality in Asia. You see, it is more inclined towards monarchical form. You see, because this is a spiritual symbol, you know, is the monarchy there. Monarchy is not merely one man ruling, it's a spiritual symbol that he will carry out our cultural, dharma or cultural function. The Asia mind looks upon monarchy not as an absolute ruler, but a spiritual symbol of their unity. And because Asian groups have been social democracies, you see, a theocratic spirit has dominated there. They are not economic and political in their leanings. They are more social and religious and theocratic. I mean, religious minded and religious, religion trying to govern the collective life. You see the Japan, Mikado. This is the position of the Mikado in many countries like that. And China has thrown off the king and has become now republican. So democratic form is the contribution of Europe to the constitutions of the world and particularly to those of Asia. It has not come to them, from their own, but it has come from the impact of the West. And in Europe, the monarchical idea is completely broken. So political Europeanizing of active mind of the whole race has been taking place. Europeanizing of the entire mind of the race, political mind is being strongly influenced by West. And Japan and Turkey, for instance, the monarchy was there, but it is gone, practically, you see. The force is Asia now is newly created intelligentsia, and if the intelligentsia of the Asian group life or democracies proves in its life, in its working out of this constitutional life of Europe adopted by them, they bring the inherited spiritual force to bear upon the problem of collective life, then something new can emerge. But that is a problem, it's not certain. What will the intelligentsia, newly created intelligentsia in Asia, people who are now taking part in democracies and elections and, in formation of governments and state governments and passing laws and all that, that intelligentsia, I mean the middle class intelligentsia, which is newly created and which has tremendously dynamic roots available to them, because they are inheritance of a spiritual culture. Well, if they have the capacity to put dynamic form to their inherited spirituality, then they can do something new and bring about a new form into existence now. And the turn, what turn this spirituality which is inherited by them will take? Social, economic, political, religious. What turn will this spirituality take? It will depend, he says, it will be determined by the mentality of the new intelligentsia. If the mentality of the new intelligentsia is westernized in its outlook of political and social life, well, their spirituality perhaps will only become individual and personal. If they have the capacity to give it a larger field of operation, then that spirituality can find expression in social, political, cultural life of the people. Well, what form it will take will be determined by the mentality of new intelligentsia, because the old forms of kingship and these have disappeared. Now, under the new leadership and under operation of this inherited spiritual force, what form of political constitution they will evolve depends on them. So monarchical form for world union is worked out. You see? And in that world union or world state, nations will take the place of individuals in the nation, is it not? Just as in the nation there are individuals, so in the world state there will be nations. And they are mature entities. They are self-conscious and they are organized societies. Nations, when they go to the world state, will not go like raw people, The individual in the collectivity might be raw, but nation going to the world union is certainly self-conscious, mature, largely organized societies. And there will be therefore a natural drive towards social democracy there in the world state. You see? Some form of socialism will try to come there. Internationalism also may be revived as a step towards this formation of one union or one state. And would it be that nations would become provinces? An international council would come and govern at the top. It would be disguised oligarchy of some big powers or big leaders. And would that form the world union, a world state? At present, democracy has only public opinion, periodical elections, and power to refuse re-election to those who are displeased. This is the only good or service which democracy is able to do today. Democracy is not functioning in its ideal way at all. It's the only what democracy at present to do is it has a public opinion. Well, on that it can depend, and it generally what it does is to form the public opinion favorable to its working. It is not molded by public opinion. That happens in one or two countries in the whole world, like England, you see, and where even vested interests are not able to influence much the policy of the government because the press is free. But even there were, press that were governed by big interests. So what happens is that public opinion as a powerful molding force of democratic life has its limitation because the state is trying to control the press. People or the democratic mind of the average man finds very little chance of getting expression and also getting effective voice in forming the policy of the nation. But there is only public opinion that is there. Periodical elections are there. That is how he feels democracy. A man who in democratic country, how does he feel that he is democratically free? Well, because he can say what he likes if the press allow him to say. Secondly, periodical elections. And he can refuse to re-elect those persons who have displeased him, or whom he doesn't like, or whose policy he doesn't approve of. You see? And now even the trade unions have joined this fray, so that in democracy, it's not the average common citizenship, but also the trade unions. And they have their say, the labor, you see. So this transitional stage, the middle class is threatened on two sides. Yes, you see, labor, you see, and government, a complicated business now. So, which are the two sides threatening the middle class? One, intellectuals are dissatisfied with what is going on. So the middle class is threatened by dissatisfied intellectual class, small minority of intellectuals who are not at all satisfied with the present, setup of government or national, state, because they find it is only unimaginative business, commerce, and economy swaying the whole field of public life. So a dissatisfied intellectual minority. And it finds that obstinate commercialism is there coming in the way of any ideal. Obstinate commercialism, you see. This is the reason of intellectual dissatisfaction among the small intellectuals. And secondly, labor. On the other side, you see, because they say that our rights are not recognized at all. So this intelligentsia is torn between the two. And these two can join. The intelligence are dissatisfied and the labor, both dissatisfied. Intellectuals are dissatisfied because it is only commerce and industry and economics that is working, and it is very without any ideal, and vested interest, and nothing possible to change. These intellectuals and the labor can join, as it happened actually in Russia. The small intellectual leadership took hold of the Russian masses, is it not, the labor, and brought about the revolution. Well, that is how it happened. The two dissatisfied classes of state joined together. Government now is a very complicated business. Government is not very simple as it was in early days. So with this complicated machinery of democracy, if a world state is to be formed, how much more complicated it would be. He's just giving an idea of the complicated nature of the machinery of government to be brought into existence for any world organization that will control the international situation. You see, a specialization is needed. And government itself is a very complicated affair. And there are many possibilities that can therefore happen. For instance, in China, democratization has taken place. A democratic organization is at the bottom for the mass. And it is ruled by intellectual bureaucracy on the top. Because it is so complicated, you can manage this thing. It's not impossible. You see, a specialization is needed, and if you know how to get about and get your things done, well, democratic organization below and a rule of intellectual bureaucracy on the top. It can be also alternatively guild socialism. Then if guild socialism comes, then guild aristocracy of labor will come to power. Average labor will not come, and aristocracy of labor will come. The same has happened in Russia. It is not a common man who is ruling, but a small oligarchy of labor leaders who are at the top in all affairs. So, well, then the third form. So he is discussing monarchy is ruled out. Well, second is the present state, democratic state, will have to be very much complicated on a world scale. Third possibility is world parliament. Can you have world parliament? By election, that is to say. That would be by all nations joining democratically and trying to evolve either a world socialism or some sort of, intermediate, transitional something. Third possibility is world parliament. Would it work by majority rule? That's another question. Would the world parliament rule by majority rule? Well, parliament form is necessary because it prevents the executive from suppressing the liberty of the individual. That is one good point about parliament. And the parliament form very often tends to become, in actual operation, modified aristocracy, or it tends to become middle class rule, which means rule of the majority, and it means tyranny of the majority again. So there is the difficulty of the parliamentary form. It is effective because it's the only form which is now felt as necessary, because it prevents the executive from taking away the liberty of the people. If there was no parliament, the officers will do just what they like. But there is a parliament which will put things right so far as the freedom of the individual is concerned. But in actual operation, it becomes modified aristocracy, either aristocracy of wealth or aristocracy of, some kind of group, top group that comes to the surface. Or it becomes middle class rule. Middle class only. And middle class rule degenerates into rule of the majority, and then means tyranny of the majority also.
Majority or minority?
Tyranny of majority, it becomes. Yes, it becomes tyranny of the majority over the minority. You see? And it involves tremendous waste of time and labor. Execution of parliamentary form involves a lot of waste of time and labor. And as a government, it's not always very efficient. And in the world state, therefore, rights of the minorities would have to be protected. because there the minorities will be nations, not one or two individuals or groups, as is case in case of nations or small states or small collectivities. It would be big nations that would be minorities there. You see, and to prevent the pressure of the majority from acting on the minority or tyrannizing would be necessary in the world state. More feasible form seems to be, therefore, out of 3 or 4 that we are discussing, parliamentary form or a democracy or monarchy and so on, more feasible form seems to be a supreme council of free nations, and you see, it would work only if few strong imperial nations whose voice and volume is very strong today and can prevail, if they join, it can function. A Supreme Council of the world, see, Council of Nations, so it's a free and, well, imperial and free nations. Imperial nations also can join, free nations also can join. Who has, strong voice and who have got power to execute and strength. Well, the question is very doubtful whether, because in this organization of any of this form is full of doubt and difficulties, and at present you cannot say that we will solve the problem inevitably by foreseeing one form only. How far the nations will allow that, say, formation of a council, well, it's difficult to say. Form of the world government is not at present of supreme importance, but what is important is that unification of powers and uniformity would be necessary in whatever is brought into existence, whether a world state or world union. There would be necessary a unification of powers. Powers will have to be united in one body, concentrated in some organization. Well, that is at present the more important question after discussing the forms. In the 24th chapter, he discusses the need of military uniformity now, because any world union or any world state that is formed will require unification and centralization of authority. What would be first? In the 24th, he discusses the need of military uniformity. That world state, well, when you call a world state, it is all right, but people are one, and unity is loose, chaotic, you see. And there is plenty of unity that way, which is loose and organic, so to say. International commerce, cultural penetration of mutual countries and continents, Asia influencing Europe, Europe influencing Africa and Asia, and so on. Many, interpenetration of cultural life is already taking place on a vast scale. And world was already feeling this oneness, need of oneness somehow vaguely. And as we said last chapter, the European collision, it was that brought this necessity to the surface. European necessity or European collision, these two shocks of the World War, brought the whole necessity of world union to the surface. Now this collision or fight took place under military organization, is it not? The cause of the shock was military. Actual operations that took place were military. Cause was not military, but execution of this, shock, was left to the military. Now he says that people after the First World War were crudely, trying to diagnose the cause, and said that, German militarism is the reason. German militarism is the cause, and if that is wiped out and put down, the problem of world peace will be secure. This, he says, was a wrong reading and a very crude idea according to him. German militarism, when depressed or put down, the whole thing would work. But the real cause is where, he says, first, international situation itself, in which, some people were trying all the time to get the best, were the people on the top trying to get advantage, and people who were not on the top always having the disadvantage. Germany was not the cause, you see. And psychology of national life, That is a national egoism. Patriotic ideas, ideas that one's country is, my country right or wrong, and so on. You see, Britannia rules the wave, somebody saying, and French saying something about their liberty and so on. That egoistic idea of national life, patriotism, limited idea of national egoism applied to state. Well, that was one cause. Second cause, and these were in all nations. These causes, international situation, psychology of nation, and worship of national ego, they were in all nations. They were not in Germany only. So war was natural, necessary. Only German egoism of the nation was best organized and least satisfied. It was best organized and not satisfied at all. Therefore, naturally, the clash came through there. But it would have come otherwise even, because the causes were there in all nations. Then second was, they thought that how to preserve peace after the first shock. They thought that League of Free Democratic Nations could exert pressure and put down, all outbreak of war or disturbance of peace. And this, he said, was a good idea at that time, but this had to fight against young Titan socialism, as he says, and old Olympian gods of bourgeoisie democratic world. Any idea of preserving the world by a League of Free Democratic Nations trying to exert pressure on international situation would have to contend with socialistic movements rising in all nations, one, and secondly, old Olympian bourgeoisie democracy, where they wanted to retain all their empires and colonies. You see, retention of empire and colony, and rise of socialistic outlook, culminating in Russian communism. This league, or this League of Democratic Nations, only trying to exert pressure and bring down peace all the time, will have to fight against these two tendencies, he says. And if they came to fight with these two, the league will break down, he says. Such a league to preserve peace will have to admit defeat when it stands against organized effort at young socialism that was rising, or old Olympian gods of the bourgeoisie, old world democratic world. In a fight between these two, this new league would have to lose. Third idea is that if every nation was democratic, then peace would be secure. This is also a half-true idea, which is not correct, because democracy can organize itself for war. And a stupendous military force can be available and mobilized by a democracy, which is unimaginable perhaps in a monarchical regime, you see. Democracy is not incapable of mobilizing a very great military power. So that democratic form spread to all the nations of the world would automatically usher in the era of peace is not a correct idea. Evolution of a central authority, therefore, is the fourth idea is that of self-determination of nations. If this principle of, now it is recognized by the UNO, fortunately, this idea of self-determination of nations, that no form of government should be enforced upon a nation by any other group or any other nation. Self-determination is now the birthright of nations. And he wrote this when it was not on the agenda of the UNO, that self-determination, if it is established, would remove a very great cause of conflict. Would be not altogether a guarantee for peace, but would remove a very great cause of conflict among nations, because it is for that self-determination that people will fight. You see, if you grant that, one cause for conflict is permanently removed. But even then, this evolution of central authority is necessary, and it must command not a military force first, but psychological consent or assent of the whole mankind. Whatever authority you organize and central authority you create, it must get the psychological assent of mankind. and use moral force upon nations to carry out its ideas and policy, and not military force primarily. But also it must serve the world, not merely first keep peace and keep down everybody from breaking out into war or breaking out into conflict, but it must also create field for its service to humanity or the world by promoting common interests, common benefits, extending all common benefits to mankind. When you create a central authority, it must not merely, act as on its military force that has great power. No, a psychological consent would be necessary, one thing. And secondly, it must serve all exact moral force upon people to carry out its policy, say this is right and this is wrong, this cannot be done because it is not good to do it, and so on like that. Secondly, that it must also serve the world by promoting common interest and distributing common benefits to mankind. Centralized authority must show a positive contribution, you see, to the progress of the ordinary man among the nations. And but even in spite of, with all these factors given, a psychological consent and a moral pressure and service to the world, still a concentration and possession of military power would be needed as the first condition for securing world peace. If you want to have world peace secured, concentration and possession of military force is necessary. Military power must be there. How to do is another question, but he says those are more important factors, psychological factors and so on. But in spite of all that, for security will be needed. Disarmament can come only if the national armies are dissolved. If the national armies are dissolved, then only disarmament can become, real, concrete. Nations must have faith in that international authority. The sole military force in international authority must hold only to keep peace. And when this is created, then you will be in for what he called the world state. The minimum military authority or maximum military power created in order to enforce peace if necessary by force, first preferably by psychological assent, by moral pressure, and by trying to show that the central authority is serviceable to all people. But in spite of it, when you create a military centralized authority, well, you will be in for the world state. And you will be surprised to know that one of the most advanced countries, Britain, has produced leaders who have contributed to the world thought, to a much greater degree than many other races in the world. England's contribution that way to the political advancement of the world is very great compared to many other nations that might be, more powerful or more strong, but they have contributed certainly very greatly to the political constitution of the world. And it was Attlee from England who 2 years back actually proposed that the world is ready for world state. He spoke it in India for the first time. On his visit to India, he advocated that now the world is ready for world state, and all world statesmen must think, when they go to UN or wherever they go, think in terms of how to create this world state. He says the conditions are so ready that unless you do it, the things are becoming more disorganized and disorderly. You can't set right things. And now, with the given scientific advance, and everybody afraid of a scientific war, well, the best condition is for launching a world state. And this idea of world state, I was so surprised to find coming out from a ripe statement from England, and supporting Sherunda's contention of the world state, as a necessary, form of the world union, as he is trying to work out the possibilities. He says the state has to be formed. He proposed this world state in many of his recent speeches. Now, in chapter 25th, he is pleading again one authority. And then again he says, whether world state or federation of nations or a league of peace, this will be one subject. And he says that even if you create one authority, commercialism is the whole phenomena of modern society. Commerce, industry, economics. Economic part is always important and fundamental in modern society and modern national life. In ancient times, economics was there, but economic was a part of the vital being of man. It was relegated to the realm of desire. Provision was made to satisfy desire in ancient society because they knew it was a part of his vital life. It was never admitted as a part of his mental life. Now, today, desire is the leading thought in the mind of the man. You see, it was never that. Thought was quite different. Thought was about philosophy, about idealism, about world, what is man, what is the future of fulfillment of man, and something else. Desire was there, but desire had a place given to it. You understand? Now he is pointing out the difference now in the structure of collective life that has undergone due to scientific progress in the last 150 years. He is pointing out that the whole form of society, the structure of society has undergone a radical change. And the Vaishya, the commercial man, the merchant, the third class is ruling mankind and not the Brahmin, the priest, or the Kshatriya and the warrior. Everything now is therefore changed. The Vaishya is dominant. The Vaishya means the merchant, you see, the economic man. And he and the Shudra are in fratricidal conflict. Labor and the, you see, economic interest, yes. The Vaishya and the Shudra, that is the merchant class and the labor class, they are in fratricidal conflict. And this has affected the whole international situation in international life of mankind. The relations of nations is influenced by this outlook of dominantly economy-centric constitution of life of man today. Even culture has become only a decorative element in man's life. How will this pass? It is no use, he says, emotionally trying to go back and call back the time spirit and say, let us reverse and get back the golden age of Victoria, which was really not the golden age, you see. But still, the time spirit is not going to bring back the golden age of the past, which after all was not the golden age. The end of this situation now in the human society and international life can come only if something in commercialism itself turns up in such a way as to change the nature of commercialism. Like atom bomb, then perhaps commercialism may think now twice as to what to do with this new threat and so on. One chance, but it is not a definitive thing. Or by reawakening of spirituality in man. How will this change? By reawakening of the spiritual element or the aspiration for spirituality in man. If you can awaken that, or if something awakens in them, then this dominant note of Vaishya and Shudra fight will go down. Otherwise, it is not going to go down. What has actually taken place is only superficial, really, where people point out, as many very time our friends always point out, but such and such a place, so much change is taking place, that church is doing something, those groups are doing something, those people are doing something. Everywhere he's pointing a valuation of that. He gives here. What has actually taken place in religious, spiritual, cultural fields is only superficial revivals. Superficial religious revivals, secular idealism. But society as an economic and productive organization is there intact. None of these movements have touched it. Do you understand? None of these movements have touched society as an economic and productive organism. It remains intact with all its force. So what is the result of all that revival? It doesn't tackle the problem at its root, you see. It's surface movement. is only superficial revival, as he says, and that is reading. That we must understand. We must not be deceived by appearance. It's good that something happens in place of nothing. It's all right. That's not the cure. Yes. What has actually taken place is only superficial religious revival, secular idealism, but society as an economic and productive organization is the main force, and that is going on. All cater to that. All cater to that. Even the best people who claim idealism, you see, the people who say, "Oh yes, how much is your ethical program now forwarded?" Then they will say, "Oh, we have got one, $50,000 fund." That's it. How many people have accepted and lived their life? No, hardly one. They have preached, yes, and then every such exposition, how many dollars it brought? The man says he can't live unless somebody listens, and then he has to talk something which he will listen. And if he talks something which people say, "Oh, what a thing," well then, you see, that's it. So the domination is there even in the revivals. My point is that the domination is not reduced, because we see some revivals, there is no, we must not be misled into thinking that, oh, this attacks the problem. It does not even touch the problem, he says. It leaves this economic and productive organization of society as the main force, where all these are trying to put ethics, spirituality, idealism, some principle as a main force. You follow the logic of it? Yes. We must be clear when we see and think. You see, we must not have wishful thinking. It's good that something is good, and something is trying to be good. Good. Very nice. We are for it. We vote for it. We support it as far as we can. But let us not be deceived with the idea that this is solving the problem. No, it is not. It is contributing to the continuation of the same society status quo. And let us be clear about that. Yes. And so the war have economic and commercial causes nowadays. The causes of war are not military but economic causes. And it dictates military and political action both. It is economy that dictates military and political action. Well, and this unfortunate good point about this economic outlook is that it is so well organized that a shock of war is now intolerable because of industrial organization. This very economic organization, industrially effective, makes any shock of war intolerable, because it carries war to the last, last man. The organization is so complete. You see, formerly people are afraid and didn't like war, because how many got killed in war? How many were recruited, mobilized? In a nation of several millions, perhaps few thousands, or when 1 lakh of army was there, it was regarded huge. Oh, they thought no end of it. The destruction of previous wars is nothing. It's nothing compared to what can happen because of the economic and industrial organization of collective life to such an extent that one shock of war becomes intolerable. And not only to one nation, to almost dozens and the whole world, as the last two world wars actually proved, that those who had nothing to do with the war were influenced, affected by it. You see, hunger and all kinds of troubles and paucity of articles of food and necessities of life, and it became terrific life. So that humanity decided after the Second World, this must not happen. That showed how strong was the reaction against this intolerable organization of industrial life. You see, industrial organization, it was that was responsible for this, the results of the shock. It is untold suffering brought to people, and this inner truth of this problem was not seized by man. They thought that only our function is to prevent the shock. It is the economic organization that is the cause. And this cause was not seized by people even after the shock. And then they thought of removing commercial rivalry. That was one potent cause of the shock, is it not? How to remove the commercial rivalry? In a society, in a nation, where is rivalry between two individuals, the state comes in and dictates, is it not, that no, you shall not kill each other. Even if you are rivals, you shall not go to the extent of injuring somebody else. In a state, organized collective life of a nation or a society, when there is rivalry between groups or individuals, the state comes down and puts the situation in order by controlling the two parties or two individuals. If two people are fighting and one says, I'm unjustly treated and therefore I'm going to fight with him, the state comes down and says, you can't fight. You say what you have to say to this, our authority, you say what you have to say, and what they decide you will have to do. Isn't it? That's what happens in an organized state or national life. He says, now you want to prevent commercial rivalry. Who is going to prevent? You must have a central authority somewhere who can put down, no, it must not happen this way, it must happen this way. Between nations, unless you create a centralized authority and equip it sufficient military power, well, it can't work. Yes, a centralized authority must be there just as in a society, so in humanity. If peace is to be kept, then world state or something with a centralized authority must come into being. Arbitration or threat of international pressure can keep peace for some time, but commercial pressure may be also used. Supposing you don't use military force or physical force, you can use commercial force, boycott, tariff wall. You can create tariff war against a nation and create a situation, commercial pressure. Boycott. Weaker nations are, even when you say weaker nations, they will be necessary to stronger nations, even for markets. After all, weaker nations, if they are destroyed, there will be no one to buy their goods. And this was where humorously put by Anatole France in one of his writings, the Penguin Islands, L'Île Penguinoise. It is a satire on French nation, you see. Penguin Islands, very fine book. And so he says, oh, it is a description of France, but not openly. It's the penguins. The penguin have got an island and they are governing and so on. So there is a leader and he says that, we went to the other island and conquered it. And what did he do? He said, we killed 1/3 of the inhabitants. Oh, why? He says, so that the 2/3 may buy our umbrellas. We killed 1/3 of the inhabitants and won the war. And then what happened? He said, oh, so the 2/3 can buy our umbrellas. Otherwise, we have to find market for umbrellas. So that's right. The weaker nations are necessary for the stronger nations, even as markets. Prohibitive tariffs and blockade also can act very effectively without actual fighting. And in fact, Germany's defeat was due more to the blockade than to actual fighting. See, because they could replace anything, food or armaments or materials. You see, the war came more quickly to an end because of the blockade. You see? So resources and starvation and depression and want of replenishing recovery can act effectively as much as fighting. So that pressures of other kind can take place, take the place of military pressure. The world state not only must command military force, but also must order commercial and economic and industrial life of the nations. It will have not only to centralize military force sufficient to carry out its decisions, but also will have to exert and bring about an order in the commercial, economic and industrial life of the nations. Industry and commerce today, because it is 5/6 of social life. There are his words almost I am quoting. You see, industry and commerce is 5/6 of social life today. And no world union can leave it out of its field. Economic principle is the governing principle of society today, and world force, whatever its form, will have to control it. Will have to deal with that situation somehow or other. Well, I think I'd better stop there.
I didn't believe this human unity. I just ate for the people who are going to be making decisions in the world and have the opportunity to study this.
Oh, they think they are all wise and it is they who are to dictate their wisdom to the world.
here.
The whole set was sent to Eisenhower, I can tell you.
Set of which?
Set of his books.
Was it?
Oh, yes.
How about Kennedy?
I don't know, somebody might have sent to Kennedy also. I know a friend in Calcutta who has sent to Kennedy on his election. From Calcutta, the whole set with a note that, will you please read these books particularly? I told him to do that. In fact, I may tell you now.
Let's write nasty.
Yeah. Okay, well and good, but if they don't, well, that's their business. It isn't their business. It's the people's business who elect them, and they have responsibility to the business,
Yes,
to the people of the world. And it isn't their business, so they've got to take their dose of castor and see. This
Yes.
is the way I feel.
Now, that is if some people really can be mobilized into that,
Yeah.
that attitude, they will have to listen. They will have to listen.
Well,
Yeah.
Wound up. I really get excited about this. Another thing, just as a point of interest, speaking of the League of Nations, you're going to Missouri. It was Champ Clark of Missouri that kept the United States from ratifying the first League of Nations
Mhm.
because Wilson had to promise Clemenceau at Paris that he had to assume the responsibility of central authorities. You said there had to be central authority, and France demanded that the United States be committed. And Wilson gave his word without clearing through Congress. And Champ Clark says, who the hell do you think you are? You can't do that, and defeated it.
I think it was right. You see, I have not yet given the reading of the League of Nations and the estimate. But the point was that Wilson, poor man, was, out maneuvered in diplomacy by European statesmen.
I know.
He was an honest idealist. There was no question about Wilson being completely straight about what he wanted, World Union and United Nations and World Union of Peace and so on. But the diplomats of Europe were too clever. And they got round him in such a way that his whole thing was, became something that was unrecognizable practically. And so we were not sorry when United Nations, USA didn't join the League of Nations.
Was so that you're going to Missouri, and it was Missouri that stopped it. It's just a point of interest. Also, there was an article about this thing.
His book, I mean, that one or any other about the problem of world population. Population explosion. How are all these people going to be fed? You see, if we don't have famines and things anymore, there used to be to kill them off. I mean, it's many people are getting soft.
Yes, I think yes. Well, he has only in this very chapter, next chapter that is coming, he has referred to one point, for instance, that they would resort to, eugenical methods of people who are congenitally unfit to give. He has written that. He has supported that.
No.
Sterilization of the criminals and the people incorrigible human type. You see, the sterilization. He has advocated that. I mean, 3 or 4.
Just birth control. I'm for this 100%.
Well, there ought to be for those children who have lots of illegitimate children. Like over here, some of them do maybe 7 something and just expect the state to support them, I mean, your class is really complicated.
Filipinos.
Parts of the world, if a rationalization on the world scale takes place, then parts that are not brought under cultivation also would be considered. With the rise of, if a world organization comes into being, then the problem will be not for one nation to solve. It should not be really even now.
I know.
Even now it should not be the nation's business. It must be now the business of nation to refer this to the UN and see, now what are we going to do about feeding the whole world population? Not feeding one nation's population. That is just the mentality we have dominant now.
I know.
You see, now how to do that? Well, then a world organization will have to be set up in such a way where nations where uncultivated portions of land has remained, well, we'll have to submit to a world plan, perhaps.
Well, but I think the other is so much more vital. I mean, that some countries are just, their population is just increasing like
Yes.
rabbits,
Yes.
and well, there's just a limit. It's just a limit, you see, to what.
Yes.
And we can't take them all over here. I mean, many of them want to come over here, but
That's the end.
that's not the end.
With the common market, one solution, is that going to be a good,
Yes, that is to say, if the production is rationalized, then distribution can take place. Now, for instance, here is a problem is quite different because here also population increase is getting on. But in country like Australia, now a surplus population should find some place there because they are occupying the whole country without being able to utilize it for that matter. Russia,
Canada, too.
yes, huh? Yes,
Canada, too.
yes.
well, breaking this Canada's land isn't, the climate is very severe.
I know, but there's quite a lot of you pretty much, isn't it?
Yes.
But I hate to have a wide open place to disappear too.
Well,
I love
I
them.
do too. You need some park areas,
Yes, yes.
Otherwise, it'd just be intolerable, if you just all jammed together all the time. And of course, another factor will be if they can work out a way to use ocean water, take the salt out and use that for irrigation, but they haven't found an economical way yet.